Hello everyone, Tom here from itContracting. Welcome back to our video series on all topics related to the technology and recruitment sector in Ireland. So in these unprecedented, uncertain and pretty strange times, we've got some great questions that have been put together for me today. So hopefully we'll be able to share some positive news with you, some positive opinions, and so let's get stuck in. Obviously, some sectors, as we all know and we've all seen, have been hit very, very badly. The tourism, hospitality sectors, certain areas of manufacturing have been hit hard. Obviously, the airline sectors have been hit very hard. Obviously, a caveat to this recruitment series is that we very much are looking at the IT or technology. And to a slightly broader extent, the sort of STEM, science, technology, engineering, manufacturing sectors. Those sectors, apart from maybe the manufacturing and some elements of the engineering areas, have been probably less impacted, less affected. But we are hearing of job losses. Very sadly, we're hearing of redundancies and reduced hours, reduced days. The recruitment sector itself has been hit quite heavily. Colleagues in other companies, have seen reduced hours. However, we have seen some bright sparks in that, in that general melee, in that we've seen a growth in demand for contract working. So typically what we've seen a bit of a rise in demand for is where companies initially had a permanent headcount. They have now still realized that they need that expertise. The projects haven't stopped for a lot of companies. They still need to continue working. They still need to be developing products. They still need to be developing software or delivering services, especially if they're in high demand areas like cloud or digital transformation. Those kind of areas have been very heavily in demand. So they've relied more on moving to a contractor model, perhaps while they wait for permanent headcount to be approved, or when they see that there could be a return to a level of stability, for example. So that's for people who have maybe been made redundant, start to look and see whether there are contract opportunities in the areas that you work. In an earlier video from earlier in the year, which late last year, in fact, where we looked at predicted trends for 2020, I don't think anyone would have predicted this personally, but we looked at two areas that we saw continuing but growing demand in, which was cybersecurity and broadly cloud-based roles. And I appreciate cloud is a very nebulous term. There's a lot of traditional jobs get incorporated in cloud, such as systems engineering and systems administration. So maybe if I narrow that down, we're talking about DevOps. We're talking about people working in containerization, cloud architecture, platform development, infrastructure as code, these kind of areas. That's where we're seeing demand now. Ancillary to that, where we're seeing a bit of an upturn and where growth areas, where companies are looking to adopt more structured frameworks. Could be agile, for example, and we're seeing a bit of demand for Scrum Masters. Project managers, because I think what we're going to see is where companies are going to need to adopt much more of an online working model. I think we're in that model now, but it's been for a lot of companies, I think it's probably been on quite an ad hoc, unstructured way. We've got through it, and I think companies have come up with solutions on the fly, some very successfully, somewhere we're going, right, we need to, for the long term, we need to work out, how do we put structure in this? How do we get delivery in a way that we couldn't do in an office environment or a more, face-to-face environment? How do we get that delivery and improve upon it? That might mean for companies to adopt more structured frameworks like an agile model, and Scrum or Kanban or whatever really does suit that industry, obviously, or a hybrid model. So even I think we could see where even companies that may not have ever thought about these areas or these kind of structured frameworks. How have we seen the recruitment process or hiring process change, and are we seeing a shift to contract positions? To answer the first part, yes. I mean, obviously, yeah, the hiring process and recruitment process has changed. Obviously, a lot more interviews are being conducted online. Whole processes are being conducted online, and some companies have decided to hold back on hiring entirely, and understandably, making those decisions when you're having virtual meetings with candidates, it is a different experience. It's a different process. It's a different mindset that you need to be in to make that decision on hiring someone that you have never shaken hands with, that you've never met in person, that your interaction has been entirely online, and you might not meet that person in the office for the foreseeable future. How do you get that person onboarded? What's that experience like for that person? Who do they interact with? How do they meet the team? These are all questions that are going to just evolve. Where companies are going to work out how they can continue, growing their businesses, recruiting and hiring. And hopefully we will be back in offices sooner rather than later. And we will have some structure and more normal processes. But, we also have to understand that, look, this is an opportunity as well. It's an opportunity to hire people who might not be in the country, who might be working somewhere else in the country. And we want to hire them, but they're going to be remote. And how do we go through that process in an online fashion? I think what we'll see, what companies probably need to adopt, and what I'm seeing a little bit more is much more structured frameworks around interviewing. So much more competency-based frameworks, maybe a behavioral assessment as one part of the interview, how they react to different scenarios in an online way. So how do they respond to incidents? What's their methodology when they're responding to incidents? But purely, how do they deal with that when they might just be interacting with people purely by chat methods or emails and phone, rather than being able to go and sit in a room with someone? Now, to a large extent, we've been doing all this anyway. We've been, okay, a lot of people are back working from home, but if we think about how we're interacting a lot in our day-to-day lives when we're in an office, we're largely interacting with people we don't have any face-to-face interaction with on a daily basis. We are by email, we are by phone, we are by chat, but that's just amplified now. So we've got to think of this as a little bit less daunting than maybe some have maybe regarded it. Where it gets tricky is where you're making that final decision. You're making that final hiring decision. And I think that's where you've got to get stakeholders who are prepared to, make that leap and be together in a virtual way, and a lot more communication and sharing between, between stakeholders faster, in an online fashion. And if you are in a position where your circumstances might have changed and you are thinking perhaps of what contracting might look like for you and how you go about that process and what the advantages are, for example, give us a call. Log on to our website, send us a chat message there, go to itcontracting.ie. We work with all the main accountancy firms in Ireland who we have a very strong relationship with, built up over a number of years. For example, have a look at our recent video there with Jimmy Sheehan of Contracting Plus and our Associate Director, Tracy Quinlan, where they go through all the considerations of getting set up as a contractor. It's really not as daunting as I think people can be led to believe. There are definitely, advantages to it, there are without doubt, some pitfalls and things to be aware of, and it might not suit everyone. But that's where we can come in. That's where we can help you. Have a chat with us. See how we can advise you on that and what opportunities there are in the market. You might be surprised. It's become incredibly challenging for a lot of people, and people have suffered insurmountable losses. And our thoughts are with everyone who's going through this at this time. However, we need to always think of the future and what positives there are, certainly in the jobs market. And there are undoubted ones. If we just talk about the flexibility around remote working, this is something that's been coming along. I think a lot of companies have been looking at this for a very long time. Maybe not quite got to that point where they've introduced remote working or more flexible working practices. But this is where companies are now. This is where we are. This is maybe our new reality. This is where we're going to be in the future.